Hello, everyone, and greetings from the Culinary Institute of America at Copia here in Napa Valley. I'm calling from the Food Business School of the Culinary Institute of America, and I am Kathy Joran, the director of the Food Business School of the CIA. And this is the FOODBIZ series webinar. The Food Business School is the Center for Graduate and Executive Education at the CIA. And our mission is to enable and empower our students to design, deliver, and lead transformative innovations that address the world's most pressing food systems challenges and what we also believe are its greatest business opportunities. This FOODBIZ Plus series is a regular program of online conversations between myself or other food business school hosts and food industry experts to explore the latest opportunities in a variety of business areas in the industry, and also to identify threats and challenges and how to deal with those. So welcome today. And I wanted to just give you a few logistical pieces of information. Today we're going to chat with our guest for about 40 minutes, and then we will talk a little bit about upcoming programs with the Food Business School that you might be interested in, both short-term and long-term. During these conversations, there is a possibility to enter questions on our Zoom platform, so please go ahead and do that if you like, if you have something additional you'd like our guest speaker to address. And that's it. Now we'll get started. So I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, Robert Bath, Master Sommelier and Certified Hospitality Educator, who is Professor of Wine and Beverage Studies at the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone here in Napa Valley. Bob Bath is teaching wine courses to students in our Associate's and Bachelor's Degrees program, as well as our Master's Degree in Wine Management program. Professor Bath, Bob, a third-generation Northern Californian, became one of the first 25 Americans to pass the Master Sommelier exam in 1993. Over the last 30 years, he's worked in virtually every aspect of the hospitality and wine industries, including managing several Wine Spectator Grand Award restaurants, directing national sales for Schaefer Vineyards, and starting two companies, Robert Bath Imports and Robert Bath MS Consulting and Wine Education. His consulting clients include the French Laundry, Taj Hotels, Crystal Cruise Lines, and more than 25 high-profile California wineries. Bob's articles on wine have appeared in Santé and Sommelier Journal, as well as other publications, and he is a frequent judge at wine competitions and a speaker at wine conferences around the world. Today, Bob is going to share current insights on the wine and beverage industry and how successful restaurants and food businesses can benefit from a profitable wine and beverage program and the synergies between food and beverage. From production methods, marketing and distribution, and restaurants to retail, we'll discuss what strategies are needed for beverage and hospitality professionals or those who have a passion for wine and food to succeed at the highest levels in these dynamic industries. So I'm going to get out of here so you can see Bob better. Welcome, Bob, and great to have you with me today to talk about the beverage industry.
Thank you, Kathy. Great to be here.
So why don't we start off by asking you, Bob, to tell our listeners a little bit more about your background prior to teaching, and also highlighting some of the activities in the wine world that you continue to participate in.
Sure, Kathy. And again, I guess you'd have to call it a life in beverage, actually. I started working in restaurants when I was 16 years old, and I was waiting tables by the time I was 19 in fine dining restaurants and in summers between college semesters. And that's when I became interested in wine. And I started teaching, believe it or not, about wine when I was in college and continued being involved in wine programs as I worked in restaurants post-graduation. And I just fell in love with it. Quite honestly, it was something that I couldn't learn enough about. And that led ultimately from my involvement in restaurants to finding out about the Master Sommelier program. And for me, the Master Sommelier program was an accreditation, but it was for me almost like a teaching credential in that I I was frequently the most knowledgeable person about wine in the restaurants I worked in, and I wanted to have a third-party credential. And so the Master Sommelier program became a goal of mine, and certainly something I was very proud to have passed. But it really, at the same time, provided a platform for me to teach. And so I've been teaching within that program now for the last 25 years, and we have different levels within that program. So it's something that I'm continuing to do on a regular basis. But I started teaching full-time at the Culinary Institute at Greystone 10 years ago, and was really one of the innovators, one of the key components of developing our graduate level program that's now entering its 10th year. And that's a wine and beverage program. And that's one thing that I'm particularly excited about, is that when we started 10 years ago, and even now, this is one of the few programs, I think, in the country that really offers graduate level education in the world of beverage.
Yeah, we're very excited to have that as part of our educational offerings, both culinary and beverage, and we're very excited that you're a lead faculty member in that program. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathy. And I'm involved also in seminars, conferences, particularly here in the United States, and these are the type of opportunities for me to still kind of network in the industry and meet a tremendous number of people and share information that's happening in the industry, because this is a very dynamic industry. Things are happening faster now than ever. And so it's exciting to be a part of this at this point in time.
No, and it's great that you stay involved in all of that, because that means that your experience and what you're teaching to our students is current and, very relevant to what's going on in the industry today. So that's so important. So maybe you can define for us what a beverage program would be for a food-related establishment, whether it be a restaurant or other food establishment, as opposed to just a wine list or a beverage list or a retail offering. How would you describe a beverage program?
Well, and I think the key word there, Kathy, is program and not just list. And today it's not just, of course, the alcoholics, the non-alcoholic beverages. It's a complete program. But I think it goes all the way back to really the food element, the kind of genesis of these type of beverage programs, to me, kind of begin with the restaurant or food concept. So they need to go hand in hand. And I think that mission statement that a beverage program has is a very important one in terms of what is it trying to accomplish. And as we know, the beverage program is frequently one of the most profitable parts of any type of restaurant or food operation. It requires less labor. At the same time, it needs to have something that is empowering and something that is captivating for the guest. And I think today we're faced with really the dilemma of having so many wonderful beverages available, and yet we don't know a lot about them. So again, this can be very intimidating for the customer. So I think the first thing about a beverage program is it needs to have a purpose. It needs to be tied in with the food program. But I think second of all, it includes everything. So often in this industry, in the food and beverage industry, we talk about mise en place. We talk about being prepared, and really that preparation of a beverage program, to me, is everything that begins with, first of all, what the list is, but then everything around that. In other words, where is the beverages being stored? What are they being served in? How are they being served? That all has a lot to do with it. And certainly the list itself, the way it's being marketed and presented to the customer, there's just so many different ways to do that. And we talk about everything from iPad wine lists now to really verbal presentations done by the server themselves. We have so many ways of presenting beverages that it's something that can be a little overwhelming. So I think that's one thing that I think is an important part of a beverage program. The other thing too is that I think price-wise, I think when you're looking at pricing, and when you look at beverage pricing, I think beverage pricing has to be empowering. And I think so often the opportunity to make money is there, but I think you have to be very sensitive also to the fact that guests are aware of value these days. They know what things cost. And so they're immediately doing that computation in their head about what things cost, or they're probably looking it up on their phone actually to see what the price actually is in a retail situation. So you really don't have those opportunities that perhaps existed before of inflating the prices. You have a much more aware and sensitive consumer. And then I think that the last piece obviously is kind of the people presenting it, the servers, the sommeliers, everybody involved in that operation that is familiar with the product. And I think that's the last piece of it, because that information is going to have to be shared with the guest in a way that really they're comfortable with. And I think that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of not intimidating them through words that perhaps they understand. So often in my world, in my sommelier world, we have all this information to share and all these technical terms, and yet that's not the kind of information that's even that relevant to the guest. And I think out of our sheer enthusiasm, we tend to say a lot more than actually is what's taken in by the guest itself. So we've got to tone down that enthusiasm a little bit and really make guests feel like they're a part of the process, rather than just overwhelmed by the amount of information that we share with them at the table. And I think that's really important. And so often, I think when people talk about beverages too, it's important to realize that maybe not everybody's having wine. Maybe people are having different types of beverages. And so the ability to be versed in not only the wine list, but also in the entire beverage program is an important part of really the guest experience. And I think what we see in America now is that certain trends that are happening right now certainly show that people want to have that kind of experience. They want to have something special. At the same time, they want to do it relatively casually.
Right, right. No, I agree. And when you're talking about the whole variety of beverages, I was just chatting with one of my colleagues here, and several of us have been at the local fancy food show, the Specialty Food Association's show here in San Francisco. And of course, beverages is a huge part of all the new products that are out there on the market right now. And one colleague was just telling me that, her impression at the show was that waters of all different kinds are the next big thing. So just, it's very interesting what kinds of new products are coming out on the market on a regular basis, right?
Right, and I think, and having gone to the fancy food show also on Sunday and absolutely loving the experience, it's that idea of food and beverage together. And I think we have to kind of remember the fact that these two were kind of meant for each other. And I think so often we're still kind of looking at wine and we're looking at alcohol as alcohol rather than as a beverage that's complementing your food. And so whether it's alcoholic or not alcoholic, this is something that's going to make your food taste better. This is something that's fun to share. And really the variety, I mean, simply when you see the variety of food that's out there in something like the fancy food show, that similar variety exists in the world of beverage. And that's what door you need to walk through to realize how many opportunities there are there.
Yep, exactly. So for a restaurant owner, business owner, whether it's retail or food service, how does one go about starting to plan a program, whether they have their own experience or whether they might need to hire someone to help them with this, or are there specific steps that they should take to begin to plan something to incorporate into their business?
Definitely. And I think one thing you have to be kind of very aware of who your clientele is and kind of where you are. And I think so often people have a great concept in mind, but they have to realize the market they're in. And there's definitely, with even this country, there's wine and beverage sales that are more specific to specific markets. Obviously, when we're here on the West Coast, you're going to have much more of an interest in beverages and wines that come from the West Coast, and corresponding on the East Coast, perhaps more interest in European wines. And so those kind of things that you have to at least start with in terms of consideration. And I think also you have to look at your competition. What are they doing? How are they successful? Look at the successful competitors, because you need to be able to compete not only with them, but they're going to give you great ideas in terms of what you should incorporate in your program as well. That's kind of where I start. Then going back to the concept of the restaurant, what fits in, what you really have budget and room for in terms of your program. And I think ultimately the price range that kind of works for your kind of operation, or the scale, the design, the type of operation that you have. But I think more than anything, you want to scale it down. I think we're really entering an era now where perhaps less is more. And I think they definitely see this trend in terms of beverage programs, is that having too many products perhaps is not only not a real smart business strategy, but it simply isn't necessary. So I think what we've seen over the last 10 years in particular is beverage programs are shrinking, but they're getting broader. So we're looking at different parts of the world. Even though you might accept the realities of the particular market you're in, you want to bring in some fun things. And certainly the other thing I see too is that this emphasis so much on farm to table, and it kind of exists so much in the wine and beverage world too. The use of local products, and whether it's wine, whether it's beer, whether it's cider, what have you, these local products now are really kind of interest to customers because they feel like they're close to the source. They have a chance to try these, and in many cases, they're not available in other markets because these are smaller producers that don't really have those distribution opportunities.
Right, right. No, that's a great point. Do you think that distributors or people who are selling these products can help restaurateurs or food business owners to select specific wines, or should people not rely on those kind of experts?
Well, it's the biggest challenge I think in any beverage program is who's going to be in charge of that program, how much time do they have for it, and so that's going to dictate a lot of really how many distributors you can work with. It affects when you can see these distributors. It affects how many people you want to do business with that's practical for the amount of time that you have. And so we've seen obviously the consolidation of jobs in restaurants in particular, and perhaps the sommelier is also a server, or the sommelier is a manager, that there's not necessarily that dedicated person, or maybe even the owner is doing this program, and they certainly have to allocate their time appropriately also. But I think more than anything is, yes, distributors, suppliers, even importers, all these people are there to kind of support you. And I think the main thing is having a clear vision in mind. In other words, not wasting the time of the distributor and not having them waste your time. When they understand your program, when they know what you're looking for, I think that time that you spend together needs to be very efficiently spent. And so the better you are at communicating that to those people and the better they are coming back to you, those are typically the people you wind up doing more business with because they understand what the needs of your business are and they're not wasting your time.
Right, right. Well, that makes sense. Nobody has time to waste these days, that's for sure. Is there anything particular that you would say that makes a beverage program profitable?
I think profitable to me is that, first of all, and over the course of my career, I've seen some wine lists that were just beautiful wine lists. They were written, really, I think it was more kind of almost like a song or a piece of art that a sommelier created, and they had absolutely no practical application within the operation itself. And typically, either that sommelier or that wine program had completely changed in the first 90 days. So first of all, you're not writing it for yourself, you're writing it for your customers. And so for me, as I said before, you have to have those products that are popular, but they don't necessarily have to be exactly that type of product. There's something that's in that style, because most customers are going to come in and they know what they know, and if they see anything or everything that they don't recognize, there's immediately a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a intimidation factor that's there. And getting over that intimidation through the server, through products on the list that they recognize, having a few safe harbors there in terms of products that they recognize is okay. And I think so often we err on the side of originality and really in many ways kind of at the same time lose our customer in the process. So I tell people that it's okay to have maybe a big producer of a certain item, particularly if it's a good product. I don't think the size of it really matters. But on the other hand, you do want to have some original things, some unique things, some things that really perhaps not a lot of people know. So that makes your program unique. Those are the kind of items to me that people are going to say, oh my gosh, this is a great experience. I have to have this. Mm-hmm. So, and I think the other thing too is really in terms of efficiently handling your inventory. The profitability to me comes in programs, say like Wine by the Glass, which is obviously a key part of any program. At the same time, this is a program or a part of the program that can be very profitable. You can lose a lot of money too because of control features. So you have to look at certain aspects there where there's a lot of profit, but there's also a lot of loss opportunity too, whether it's just through waste or theft or something that actually goes bad. So I think this is where you have to kind of have a program that has that kind of discipline. And to me, that the control, the monthly inventory, the tracking that you have, the programs that are available now to allow you to kind of track your inventory, this is where I see a lot of operations that wind up becoming unprofitable because they don't have those control features. And you're silly not to have those with all the available options and programs that are available now.
Right, right. No, that's great advice on ways to manage the program efficiently to make it profitable. And I like your suggestion of having something familiar as well as something unique on wine lists. When I go to restaurants, I'd like to see something familiar, but if I do, I often will ask for recommendations for something more unique and try something different, just because I have a comfort level by seeing something that I recognize, but yet wanting to try something a little bit different.
Well, I completely agree. I think consumers in general, or people in general, they don't want to embarrass themselves. I mean, it's just a natural human trait. And so the more that we can create that, again, empowerment, the more that they feel comfortable, the more they're going to ask these questions. And at the same time, they're seeing people know exactly what they want. And so often that table experience has really got to be, what does this person know? What do they want to know? And really kind of fulfilling that, because this is really, it's very much a service industry. And I think that's what's really important, is that we're trying to make this guest have an experience that's going to be memorable. And if anything, that's probably the mantra of any kind of program.
Right, exactly. Which brings us, to the question that we had added to our list here about hospitality playing a role in the beverage program. And you have talked a bit about that, but it's really a key component on the success of a program, it seems.
Well, I grew up in hospitality, and I feel like it becomes kind of part of your DNA at some point, and that you're just you enjoy being around people, you enjoy the experience of serving people, and I think that's what's really, really exciting, is just to see their experiences and how much they appreciate that. But I think that has to be translated through to the people obviously doing all that service as well. And I remember experiences, for example, I think this is many years ago, I was at a restaurant and I remember a server coming to the table and they said, "Would you like anything to drink?" And I felt a little kind of taken back by that, because I thought, well, maybe you should assume that I'm going to have something to drink, even if it's just water. And I think so often we don't really think about how we say things or what we say, because that was a perfect opportunity, obviously, to say, "Would you like a glass of water? Would you like a glass of wine today? What type of beverage may I bring you?" With, again, suggestions kind of built into that. So from the very moment that somebody's coming to the table, you're not only selling, but you're also being very specific in terms of trying to get to that right away, rather than asking a very broad question like that really, to me, doesn't really accomplish anything. So I think this is where we kind of err, is that we don't really talk enough about specifically and recommending things. And I think the other thing too is when we talk about food and wine, or food and beverages, the pairings, this is one thing that I think everybody in America has an interest in food and wine. Few people have a real sophistication about it. So there's an inherent curiosity of what should work with what. And I think there's an assumption also that the server of that restaurant knows more about those pairings than they do. So certainly that suggestive selling of saying, "This goes particularly well with this," or "We're featuring this," or "We tried this in lineup tonight and we love this pairing," that kind of personal validation, to me, has a lot of power with the guest. And I think we need to talk about it in that way also. And that so often when I'm in a restaurant situation and the server will say, "This pairs well together," I'll order it immediately, even if I'm not going to have it, just to kind of reward them and say, "That was so great that you were kind of encouraging me to try something."
Right. And that speaks to how important the training is within the restaurant, and how important it is for the servers to be able to experience something, to be able to make those recommendations. It's pretty hard to talk about all of that sometimes when you don't have that experience yourself, or you don't have someone who has had that experience sharing that with you.
And the education is an ongoing process, whether it's done formally through schools, or whether it's done through organizations and accreditations, or it's done just at the level of really the operator, this restaurant or whatever operation it is itself. But it never stops. And I think so often we teach and we say, okay, everybody's there. And yet when we look at an industry where there's obviously a constantly changing workforce, when we look at people really wanting to learn more, but not having much time to do it. We really have to kind of take that education program and continue to do it on. You're never there, I guess is what I'm saying. This is something you're doing every day. And I think for people within the industry too, people working in restaurants or operations for a long time, sometimes that education becomes a really an important part of why they stay. They're learning more, they're enjoying it, or maybe perhaps they're even being empowered and become part of the selection process. And I think that's one thing where that empowerment of your employees, also letting them be a part of the process. Obviously, if they're involved in the wine tasting, if they're involved in that, they already feel like they're empowered. They feel like they've contributed rather than they're just handed information and they're delivering it at the table. So I think that becomes an important part, particularly as you develop perhaps more senior members of your staff and letting them participate.
Exactly. No, I think that's so true. And in any organization or in any position, right, empowerment of employees is always a positive, and ability to involve them in the actual organization and with the customers is benefit to both the customer and the employee, as well as to the business owner. So let's talk a little bit about all the different kinds of challenges that are talked about in our industry today, from climate change to sustainability to the environment and carbon footprints. How much of those types of things does a business owner need to keep in mind when they're thinking about a beverage program?
Well, they're in some cases very hot topics, but you're right, they're very relevant in terms of what's happening, and actually very relevant to the millennial generation, which is becoming a very important part of the consuming part of our country. So these are topics that to me have to be kind of addressed. Maybe in the case of, say, global warming, it's interesting because we have now sparkling wine coming from England. We have vineyards in Norway. We have parts of the world that you never would have dreamed would be involved in growing things like grapes that now are actually taking a stab at it. So for parts of the world, they're delighted to be in global warming situations because they have opportunities that never existed. On the other hand, you look at other areas, and living here in the Napa Valley, for example, we have vintners who are concerned that maybe 50 years from now, Cabernet Sauvignon will not exist here anymore, that we'll simply have to transition to a variety that handles the heat better. And so what we see, I think, in addition to global warming, is we see kind of global weather irregularity. And so these swings, whether they're cold swings or hot swings, rainy or dry swings, they seem to be more dramatic than they have in the past. And so that's what's created a little bit of a challenge, certainly from a farming standpoint, and even ultimately in terms of a winemaking standpoint. So I think we have to, and we've continued to get better in terms of farming grapes to kind of deal with these natural challenges that are happening. On the other hand, when you look at really the percentage of the world now that's becoming sensitive about organics, and we talk about this, for example, in wine and in grape growing, and organically grown grapes versus organic wine. And this is something that transcends into people's diets, whether it's organic or whether it's gluten-free or what have you. These become a very important topic for wine producers now in particular. And the certifications that they have in the industry are really kind of becoming helpful to consumers in terms of understanding more about what this producer is doing, that gives them some kind of label recognition in terms of maybe somebody who prefers a organically made wine or organically grown grapes. We have parts of the world like New Zealand and South Africa that are leading the way. Both those countries are completely sustainable, and they're heading towards organic status that'll probably happen in the next 10 or 15 years. You look at California, 5% of our vineyards in California are organically farmed. And I think it's a scary number, first of all, because it seems so low. But on the other hand, our percentage of sustainable vineyards has gone up dramatically over the last 10 years. So we're moving in the right direction. And I think that's something that's going to continue to change. People are going to continue to farm responsibly, even with all these climate challenges that we have. I think people have realized that they want their vineyard around 100 years from now, and they're going to have to do certain things in terms of grape growing, even in terms of wine making, that are really going to allow that system to preserve, that vineyard to preserve itself, so it is there 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I guess as a business owner, it's a decision to make on whether you want to support those kinds of suppliers and growers and producers that are leaning in that direction and support that kind of sustainability and organic growth methods and things like that.
And I think you're exactly right. And one of my favorite people to talk about with this is John Williams with Frog's Leap Winery, and they're one of the leading organic wineries here in the Napa Valley. And when you talk to John, it isn't like he wants the whole world to suddenly become organic, but he says every little thing you do, the way you kind of approach it in terms of your mental approach, that is what ultimately makes the difference. So I think that's what it is that our attitudes are changing about this, and we realize that this is something we have to do to preserve the planet, to really preserve a healthy lifestyle. And so that is the kind of attitude that I think pervades now more so in the wine industry than ever has. And we have even particular programs like biodynamics that take it even a step further. So there's always going to be people out there that are kind of pushing the limits in terms of really trying to try things that perhaps in many cases are centuries old, but actually relate to taking care of our planet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, it's really important. And I think what we're seeing in other beverages is changes in packaging to make the packaging materials less quantity. I mean, there's some organizations that are packaging their making their packaging materials thinner, or they're going to more biodegradable products, which is helping. So those are all things that can also be considered in choices of beverages on programs as well.
Well, I think you're right, because when you talk about the global footprint and we talk about so many products, and you look at the United States, and we are the largest consumer, for example, of wine in the world. We don't consume more every day than everybody, but in terms of volume, we consume more than anybody else. So everybody wants to be here. Everybody wants to be in that kind of market. At the same time, these products come from all over the world. So just the cost of getting them from there to here is significant. So for them, it's already a cost. But that packaging, and I think even for the buyer now, that buzzword of saying they're being more sensitive with their packaging, they're using a different type of glass, they're farming more organically. That, to me, collectively may wind up being the decision maker in terms of carrying a product or not. And so as a winery, you're probably going to want to consider that, because in a very competitive atmosphere, you're going to try to find that one thing that gives you an advantage over somebody else.
Right, right. We talk a lot in the, when we talk about different food products, about businesses, the importance of a business having a story, and about the individual owner, or about the business itself and how it came about. How important do you think it is in the beverage industry for not only the restaurant or retail operation to have a story, but to be able to tell a story about the producers that they're offering products from?
Well, let's put this in perspective. Here in the Napa Valley, we have 500 wineries, over 500 as a matter of fact now. Now, of those 500 wineries, how are you going to stick out? And again, my good friend Paul Wagner, a fellow instructor, he relates it to what his mom says when he was very young. And so, what makes you so special? And I think that's what we're talking about here, is what makes you so special. And that's wrapped up in the story in terms of what you do. And being a small family-owned winery that has received high scores in publications isn't enough anymore. Now there has to be more of a story. Why did you get involved? Where did you get involved? What's the history of the property? What is unique about the family or the type of variety that you're working with? So many of these are kind of wrapped up in the story itself. And I think everything that you do has to relate back to something that makes it a little bit different from the other person. So finding that story is something that really kind of looking at what is unique about yourself, your operation, about the vineyard, about the grapes, about how you make the wine. You have to find those points of differentiation, and you have to use that. But at the same time, as I said earlier, you have to know what everybody else is talking about. So that organics, for example, may be that point of differentiation. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about that's kind of woven into your story. And price-wise, we also see, particularly here in the Napa Valley, we see a lot of very expensive Cabernet Sauvignon. So again, price doesn't necessarily identify the kind of market that you'll reach. And I think a lot of people at some point in time thought that's the way you're going to differentiate yourself. It really doesn't anymore.
Right, right. No, and I think it's important to include those kinds of products on a program, educate your team and servers about that, because a lot of times consumers do make their choices based on the story of the product. So it's a great opportunity to be able to create an interesting beverage program by including those stories.
Well, and like you said, I think one thing I've always known is, or shared with servers in particular, is can you say 3 or 4 things about this product that doesn't have anything to do with the price or a score or anything like that? And again, those 3 or 4 points, you don't have to know the whole story of the winery, but those are those 3 or 4 differentiating points that, to me, again, make the guest feel at least they're looking at something rather than just a list with a price next to it. And that's where you have to bring color to the beverage program.
Right. No, that's great. So you talked a little bit earlier about some trends, but are there any other points that you'd like to make about specific trends that you're seeing in our industry now and for the next 5 years that might be something that we haven't already talked about?
Well, one thing I think when we talk about non-alcoholic beverages, and I think this is one thing that I absolutely love talking about, because what I've learned just through teaching this over the last 10 years is really remarkable. And I think about programs like the Master Sommelier program that I teach in, and I think about what we taught about, or how we taught 20 years ago, and what we teach about now. And 20 years ago, we taught about things like cigars that we don't even teach about now anymore. It's not even part of the program. Now we teach about things like coffee and tea. And it's interesting to see coffee and tea actually taking a page from the wine industry and using words like varieties, using the words like terroir. Suddenly we're seeing the non-alcoholic industry talking kind of in wine terms. And I find it very exciting because you can enjoy the differences. And I think you have, obviously, in terms of what's available quality-wise, whether we're talking about single plantation coffees or teas, we're talking about so many different producers now, importers that are bringing in such great product, that what's available now is really, really exciting. So I think the quality is obviously higher, but the information is higher. And this is something that it's not just a cup of coffee anymore. It's like, well, what is this single origin? Is this washed method? There's so many interesting dynamics to this now. And how does Colombian in a pour over versus Colombian in a brew style? It's really fun to have that kind of conversation. Water, as you mentioned earlier, is incredible. As a matter of fact, in our graduate program, the very last tasting that we do is actually a blind water tasting. And after 9 months of being in class, tasting all kinds of beverage, we always find it somewhat interesting to be staring at a row of 12 different perfectly clear glasses with a clear beverage in it, and yet you can smell, you can taste the differences. And I think it's fascinating that those differences exist, and it's also interesting because people are paying attention. They know the differences. They obviously can identify kind of what they like and dislike. So it's really exciting to be able to tell the difference in these and to know the difference, and then the story on top of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I think you're right. I mean, you see more and more beverage programs that include whole lists of non-alcoholic beverages, whether they're coffees, teas, waters, mocktails, all different kinds of combinations, because everybody is looking to drink responsibly as well as enjoy, their alcoholic beverages. But also doesn't want to sacrifice food and wine pairing or food and beverage pairings or flavor, taste, enjoyment. So it's a really nice opportunity to head in a little bit of a different direction and expand beverage programs.
Well, it is. And I think you have to accept the reality of the marketplace too. Over 25% of Americans don't drink alcohol at all. Another 25% don't drink wine. They drink other types of alcoholic beverages. So you're not assuming everybody's going to have a glass of wine, but they're probably going to have some kind of beverage. So that's where you have to kind of start. And yet what we see in trends now too is that even though alcohol consumption overall in America is up, occasional alcohol drinkers are actually not, they're going to drink probably even less. They're not thinking about, I should be drinking more. They think I should be drinking less, because they're thinking about their health. They're thinking about nutrition. They're thinking about so many things. And this is kind of where the millennial generation subject comes in. And I think we have to really start paying attention to that, because this is a generation that's really going to, over the next 10 years in particular, start to really make an imprint in terms of what's happening in beverage sales around the world. Kind of as the baby boomers kind of fade out and Gen X kind of has their kind of short 10-year span here of kind of being the dominant force. It's really going to be relatively short. So we've seen so much data. We've talked so much about this millennial generation, and I think so often they're kind of the overanalyzed generation. Everybody kind of knows what they want to do, and it's almost feel like they've been in the spotlight since they've been little kids. They kind of love being there and talking about themselves. And I think at the same time, you have a generation that financially is going to have a lot of challenges in terms of being able to buy a home or in terms of having expendable money. So they're going to be careful. And so often they talk about having these extraordinary experiences. On the other hand, they're the kind of consumers that now they're raised in the era of Amazon, where everything's kind of delivered to your home, and wine and beverages, even food now, those experiences now are taking place at home. So this idea of direct-to-consumer shipments, whether it's wine or other beverages, is a huge part of the industry, and that experience when they go out might be big, but there's other experiences at home that can be significant as well. It's a generation that knows about food and beverages together. They like the combination of the two. Maybe don't want to spend that much money, but they're totally open. Quite frankly, I'm not sure how loyal they are. I think they enjoy the breadth of the experience, different experiences, rather than staying with one thing all the time, which is, again, perhaps more of where the baby boomer generation was, and even the generation before them was like, I'm a Scotch drinker. I drink Scotch every day. This baby boomer generation is not that way. They want to try something new. And when you look at something like White Claw, which is a alcoholic seltzer water. Now, just to put this in perspective, White Claw will sell 70 million cases this year.
Oh my.
Now, 5 years ago, they were under 50,000 cases a year. What made White Claw so successful? Well, first of all, there was a perception that it was healthier. It's around 100 calories, but there was a perception that because it was just seltzer and just had alcohol added to it, that it really was lower in calories. Second of all, it had an appeal to male and female audiences. So you really weren't challenging either gender in terms of who would drink this. Also, it was fairly easy. There were 6 flavors. There was kind of natural sugar used in the sweetening of them. On the other hand, it was perceived as alcohol, but lower in alcohol, healthier, and something that wasn't too expensive. And it checked all the boxes for millennials and just took off. So what is going to be the next White Claw? I think you're going to continue to see these beverages that kind of come out of nowhere, these categories that come out of nowhere. And I think that's what makes it interesting in terms of new things on the marketplace, but it's got to be very aggravating for people saying, am I going to be successful 10 years from now? I'm doing okay now. Or are people going to be interested in my product 10 years from now?
Well, that's where, companies, either manufacturers, producers, or people who are serving those products need to be flexible and be, aware of what the current trends are and be willing to change, because that's how they evolve and continue to evolve in a successful way, right? It's the ones who aren't willing to make those adjustments that, like you say, might not be around 10 years from now.
Well, and every beverage, coming back to beverage programs too, beverage programs have to be dynamic that way. They have to kind of shift. And if rosé now is the new kind of hip wine that people are drinking, they need to have more rosés or selection of rosés. They need to kind of understand the way the market's changing and kind of adapt to that. So that's really important. Or if organic wine is going to be more important, and we're highlighting those on the list in terms of maybe a special symbol that shows that these are organically produced products. That to me is where that dynamic portion of the beverage program is very key in maintaining a clientele and developing that clientele over time.
Definitely. Well, clearly there is a lot to learn in this area of beverages, beverage programs, beverage producers, all of the above. And so as for business owners and people who are interested in developing programs, there are ways to get education. And I know we've talked about, you've talked a little bit about WSFED and different organizations out there to get more beverage education. We also offer some programs through the CIA. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the graduates and happenings that are included, particularly in our master's program in wines and beverages, which was a graduate certificate program and is now a master of professional studies in wine. So maybe I'll let you speak about that a little bit.
I'd love to, Kathy. And I started teaching at the Culinary Institute of Greystone in 2004. I was an adjunct instructor. And in 2010, I was given the opportunity to help develop this program. And as you mentioned earlier, this is a master's certificate program that now is a master's degree. And it's a program that starts in September. It runs through April, and it's a 30-week program, 30-credit program that really talks about the world of beverage. So the first thing we wanted to create this program as we were developing it was the fact that it wouldn't be just about wine. And certainly we're in the heart of the Napa Valley. We're in a beautiful place to learn about that, but we're also in a beautiful place to learn about beverage in general. And so this program touches on sake, it touches on beer, it touches on spirits, it touches on the business of wine too. So again, how to compete in this market that we've just been talking about. That to me are all significant parts of this program. We have over 60 different speakers that come during this course of program. In many cases, these are global celebrities, global experts on their particular topic. So we have a tremendous amount of access to these people being in the Napa Valley that are familiar with our program, that love empowering our students. And what we see now after 10 years of this program is these students have gone out in the industry and they're making a difference. They're starting their own businesses. They're working in many different segments of the industry. But I think more than anything is they come out of this program and they are the kind of individual that's going to be able to matriculate in the system very quickly, and that they already have a background. They don't need as much training. They have that kind of background that allows them to become more effective faster in an organization. And for me, that's the kind of employee you want to have, somebody that you can fast track. And that's these kind of people that are coming out of this program. So it really appeals, regardless of where you want to go in the industry. It gives you an opportunity to really find where that passion is and then follow that passion once you leave the program.
Thank you, Bob. That's wonderful. So this is a program that, some potential business owners or future business owners, whether it's food service or retail or any part of that business, might be interested in for themselves, but also to keep an eye out for graduates of this program that might be people that you would want to employ in your businesses, or some of them are also looking at or are already starting consulting businesses that might be available to help restaurateurs and people develop their beverage lists. So we just wanted to make everyone on this call, this webinar, aware of that program for both personal interest or their own business interest, as well as for looking for people and being aware of the people that are out there in the industry now that are graduates of this program that could be helpful to people in our business. So I'm going to quickly talk about a couple of other programs that we have coming up. But first, I would like to say thank you so much to Bob Bath for joining me today and for sharing his expertise on our beverage programs. Certainly, Bob, you are a wealth of information, and we really appreciate your time today and sharing that with our listeners.
Well, thank you, Kathy, so much for letting me be a part of this webinar. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to share all this information.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to move on now to one more slide here to let people know about our master's programs. As Bob just talked about, we have the Master Professional Studies called the Business of Wine, or Studies in Wine Management, but he mentioned it includes all different types of beverages. We also have a Master's of Professional Studies in Food Business. That program is a 2-year online program for working professionals in the industry to learn about the business of food and developing a restaurant or food service operation, for developing a food product to launch on the market, food or beverage product, and also to work at developing a program or business opportunity within an organization. So many of our students in this program are working within other food operations and are just looking to contribute more to their own organizations, to move up in their organizations. And so they are working at earning their master's degree in food business. Both of these programs are available now for application for the fall 2020 start semester. And you can find them at ciachef.edu/masters. More information on each program and how to apply for anyone who might be interested in either of those programs. Next, I do want to mention that we do have a few short courses, executive education level courses that are taught on another online platform called Teachable. And these are 5-week courses, very self-paced, with incredible content by faculty that are also teaching in our master's program, that the content is delivered in a weekly format, but then is available to the students who take these programs indefinitely. So there's a wealth of information and content in these programs that will benefit anyone in the industry or looking to be a part of the industry, that then would be available for review and consulting on a regular basis. So I wanted to mention those. The next group of these classes starts on March 16th for 5 weeks. Food experience design, food venture formation and financing, and there's also a branding class that is a part of this program. So you can take individual courses or all three, and those are more information available on those at foodbusinessschool.org. foodbusinessschool.org. So thank you all for joining me today with Professor Bath. I hope you enjoyed the information that he shared about beverage programs, and thought that was some valuable information that you can use in your future businesses. Keep an eye out at foodbusinessschool.org for the announcements of the next FoodBiz Plus sessions, which will be posted in the next couple of weeks. We typically do these approximately once a month. So look forward to seeing you here again. And again, thank you for joining me today. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye now.